The hospital had a way of stripping people down to their essentials. St. Jude Medical Center didn't care who you were or what you owned. Its fluorescent lights hummed the same over everyone. The air smelled of antiseptic and old coffee. The chairs were hard, the floors unforgiving, and the waiting never felt fair. Julian Holloway sat near the emergency room entrance, elbows resting on his knees, hands loosely clasped. His tailored coat hung open, forgotten. The polished shoes that usually carried him through boardrooms and private elevators were scuffed now, damp from pacing the sidewalk earlier. He hadn't realized how long he'd been walking until his legs finally refused. A glass wall separated the waiting area from the controlled chaos inside. Stretchers rolled past. Nurses moved with practiced urgency. A monitor beeped somewhere, steady and indifferent. Julian hated hospitals. Not because they frightened him, but because they reminded him of something he preferred not to think about, that no amount of wealth could buy certainty. Here money lost its voice. Everyone waited. Everyone hoped. Everyone was reduced to a name on a chart. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He didn't check it. The driver he'd sent away earlier had already texted twice. His assistant once. Someone else from the office had probably noticed he'd gone silent. Let them worry. Tonight he wasn't a CEO. He was just another man sitting under buzzing lights, waiting for news he wasn't sure he wanted. A sliding door hissed open. Cold air swept in from outside. That's when he noticed her. She sat a few chairs down, close to the glass doors, as if she might need to run at any second. A thin black jacket clung to her shoulders, clearly not meant for the chill. Her hands twisted something in her lap. An apron. Faded. Creased. The kind worn by people who stand on their feet all night and still smile for strangers. At first, Julian only noticed the way she kept standing up, then sitting back down. 2 steps forward. 2 steps back. Over and over. Like her body didn't know what to do with the fear inside it. Then he saw her face. She was crying but quietly. No sobbing. No attention-seeking. Just tears slipping down her cheeks while she stared at the automatic doors like they might answer her if she looked hard enough. Julian looked away instinctively. He told himself it wasn't his business. Everyone here had a reason to be afraid. That was the point of places like this. Pain gathered. Stories collided. And strangers learned, briefly, how close they all were to losing something. A nurse walked out and called a name that wasn't hers. The woman straightened anyway, hope flashing across her face before it died just as quickly. She sat back down, shoulders slumping. Her lips moved. Julian didn't mean to listen. But the room was quiet and her voice barely made a sound. "Please," she whispered. "Please let him be okay." Something tightened in Julian's chest. He shifted in his seat, crossed his arms, uncrossed them. His watch caught the light, glinting sharply against the dull plastic chairs. He wondered if she noticed. He wondered if she cared. The doors opened again. A gurney rushed past, sheets pulled high, a pair of shoes sticking out at the end. The woman flinched so hard she nearly dropped the apron. That did it. Julian stood before he'd fully decided to. He walked a few steps, then stopped. He didn't want to startle her. He didn't want to intrude. He cleared his throat softly. "Excuse me." She looked up fast, eyes wide, cheeks wet. For a second, fear flickered across her face. Then embarrassment. She wiped her cheeks with the heel of her hand. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to." "You don't need to apologize," Julian said. His voice came out quieter than he expected. Are you waiting on someone?" Her jaw tightened. She hesitated, clearly deciding whether to answer at all. "My brother," she said finally. "They took him in over an hour ago." Julian nodded. "I'm sorry." She let out a breath that sounded more like a laugh without humor. "Yeah, me too." Silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. Julian noticed small details he normally wouldn't. The faint smell of coffee on her jacket. The slight tremor in her hands. The way her foot tapped the floor in uneven rhythm. A nurse passed by again, shaking her head gently when their eyes met. "Not yet." The woman's shoulders sagged. Julian felt a strange pull, like he was standing at the edge of a story he didn't yet understand. And if you're listening to this right now, sitting in your car or lying in bed, take a second to settle in. Stories like this don't rush. If you want to hear how moments like these unravel, make sure you're subscribed. You don't want to miss where this night leads. The woman stood abruptly, pacing once more, her breath shallow. Julian realized something then. Whatever had brought him to this hospital tonight wasn't over. It was just beginning. The chairs outside the ER were molded plastic, the kind designed to be wiped clean quickly, not the kind meant for comfort. Danielle felt every curve of it pressing into her back as she sat, stood, then sat again. The floor beneath her shoes was still damp from people tracking in rain. It smelled faintly of bleach and something metallic she didn't want to think about. She told herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth. It didn't help. Every few seconds, her eyes snapped back to the sliding glass doors. They opened with a soft mechanical sigh, then closed again, sealing away whatever answers waited on the other side. Each time, her heart jumped like it had been called by name. Nothing. She pressed the folded apron harder against her palms. The fabric was stiff with old grease stains and repeated washings. She'd meant to take it off before coming inside, but she'd forgotten. Or maybe she hadn't wanted to. Maybe it was proof she hadn't imagined the night. Proof that only an hour earlier she'd been pouring coffee and joking with customers, not sitting outside an emergency room wondering if her brother would wake up. A man across the room coughed. Someone's phone rang and was quickly silenced. The clock above the nurse's station ticked forward with quiet cruelty. Danielle stood again. She paced exactly 3 steps, stopped, then turned back. She didn't want to look frantic. She didn't want the staff to think she was difficult. She'd learned early that being labeled difficult never helped. It only made people talk slower to you, look past you, explain less. She sat down hard and rubbed her temples. Why hadn't she insisted he rest? The thought cut sharp and sudden. He'd laughed it off like he always did. Said he was fine. Said he'd just finished the shift, then sleep all day. He always said that. And she always let him, because rent didn't wait and neither did bills. The doors slid open again. Danielle was on her feet before she realized it, breath caught halfway in her chest. A nurse stepped out, scanning the room. For a split second, hope flared so bright it almost hurt. Dan, the nurse started, then stopped, checking her chart. No, I'm sorry. Not yet. The words were gentle. Practiced. Danielle nodded like she understood. Like that was reasonable. Okay, she said, even though her voice sounded far away to her own ears. She sat back down, knees weak. As soon as the nurse disappeared, the control she'd been clinging to slipped. She leaned forward, elbows on her thighs, face dropping into her hands. Her shoulders shook once, then again. She didn't make a sound. Tears slid down, warm and unstoppable, dripping between her fingers onto the floor. She didn't wipe them away this time. She didn't have the energy. She just stayed there, bent over, breathing through the ache in her chest. Around her, the waiting room kept moving. Shoes squeaked. Someone laughed softly at something on a phone. Life continued with cruel normalcy. She felt it then. Not a sound. Not a touch. A presence. Danielle lifted her head slightly, just enough to see a pair of polished shoes standing a careful distance away. She followed them up to dark slacks, a well-cut coat, hands held loosely at his sides like he wasn't sure what to do with them. "Excuse me," the man said quietly. She startled, pulling her hands away from her face too fast. Her cheeks burned. She wiped at her eyes, annoyed that they were still wet. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't mean to cry like that." The words came out wrong. Like she was apologizing for existing. "You don't have to explain," he said. His voice was calm. "Oh, not pitying. I just wanted to check if you were okay." Danielle almost laughed. "Okay." She glanced at him, really looked this time. He didn't belong here. Not like the rest of them. His coat was too clean. His posture too composed. He looked like someone who usually didn't wait for things. "I'm fine," she said automatically. He nodded but didn't move away. They stood there for a second longer than necessary. Long enough for the hum of the lights to fill the space between them. She sighed, shoulders dropping. I'm sorry. I shouldn't snap. It's just been a night. I understand, he said, even though she knew he probably didn't. She hesitated, then added, my brother's inside. He nodded again. That explains the apron. Her eyes dropped to it. For the first time she felt foolish wearing it. I came straight from work, she said. Didn't even clock out. Diners don't usually love that, he said. That earned him a small, tired smile before she could stop herself. No, she said. They really don't. The doors slid open once more and both of them turned at the same time. Danielle's heart slammed against her ribs. Still nothing. She swallowed hard. Somewhere inside that room her brother was fighting for breath. And she was sitting here, talking to a stranger, with no idea how much worse this night was about to get. The nurse's footsteps faded down the hall, leaving the waiting area suspended in a strange, uneasy quiet. Danielle sat back in her chair, hands folded so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had gone pale. The folded apron lay between her fingers like an anchor, something solid she could hold on to when everything else felt like it was slipping. She tried not to imagine what was happening on the other side of the glass. That was the rule she'd made for herself years ago. Don't imagine. Don't guess. Because once your mind starts filling in blanks, it never stops. It runs ahead, inventing images you can't unsee. The sliding doors opened again. Danielle flinched despite herself. Two paramedics wheeled an empty gurney out this time, talking quietly to each other. One of them laughed at something the other said. The sound felt wrong here, like laughter at a funeral. Danielle's chest tightened. She lowered her head and whispered, barely moving her lips. Please. Just, please. She wasn't sure who she was talking to. God maybe. Or whatever. Listen when you were out of options. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to keep it low. She didn't want to be that person. The one who cried loudly, who made a scene, who became a story the staff told later. A few feet away, Julian Holloway sat back down in his chair. He hadn't meant to sit so close to her, but it felt wrong to put distance back between them now. He rested his forearms on his knees, mirroring the posture he'd been holding for most of the night. He noticed things he usually filtered out. The scuff marks on the floor. The faint rattle of an air vent overhead. The smell of burnt coffee drifting from somewhere behind the nurse's station. The way Danielle's foot tapped, then stopped, then started again like a broken metronome. She didn't look at him, but she knew he was there. You could feel when someone was paying attention even without eye contact. Minutes stretched. Then more minutes. Julian checked the clock on the wall. Only 9 minutes had passed since the nurse last came out. Felt like an hour. He cleared his throat softly. Do you want some water? Danielle shook her head without looking up. I'm fine. The answer was automatic. Practiced. Julian nodded, accepting it for what it was. He'd heard that same phrase in courtrooms, in board meetings, in hospital rooms before. It almost never meant what it said. The doors opened again. This time, a nurse stepped out holding a clipboard, her eyes scanning the waiting area. Danielle was on her feet before the nurse finished the first syllable. Yes, she asked, voice tight. The nurse offered a small, apologetic smile. I don't have an update yet. The doctor's still with him. Danielle nodded. Okay. She sat back down slowly, like her body was made of glass. The nurse hesitated, then added gently, We'll come get you as soon as we know more. Thank you, Danielle said. The nurse disappeared back inside. As soon as the doors closed, Danielle bent forward, elbows on her knees, head hanging low. Her breath came faster now, shallow and uneven. Julian watched her shoulders rise and fall. Hey, he said quietly. Try to breathe with me for a second. She looked up at him, eyes glossy, suspicion flickering there again. But the edge of panic in her chest was sharper than her distrust. Just once, he said. In through your nose. Against her better judgment, she followed him. They breathed in together. Slowly. Now out. The air left her lungs in a shaky rush. They did it again. And again. By the third breath, the tight band around her chest loosened just a little. Thanks, she muttered, embarrassed. No need, Julian said. Hospitals do that to people. She studied his face, then really studied it. He looked tired. Not in the way she was tired, but still. Like someone who carried a lot and didn't talk about it. What are you here for? She asked suddenly. Julian hesitated. The truth rose quickly, then stalled. A friend, he said finally. It wasn't a lie. Just incomplete. She nodded, accepting it without comment. The clock ticked on. Somewhere inside the ER, a monitor beeped faster than before. Danielle's head snapped up. Her heart started racing again. Julian felt it too, that subtle shift in the air. The sense that something was about to change. The doors slid open. And this time a doctor stepped through. Danielle stood, breath caught in her throat as the doctor scanned the room, eyes landing on her. Family of Samuel Lewis? The name echoed in the waiting area. Danielle's mouth went dry. Yes, she said, voice barely steady. That's me. Julian felt his chest tighten for reasons he couldn't yet explain. The doctor took a step toward them. And whatever he was about to say would change everything. The doctor didn't rush his words, and that alone made Danielle's stomach twist. He stood a few feet in front of her, clipboard tucked against his chest, expression carefully neutral. Danielle hated that look. It was the same one doctors wore right before they delivered news that came with conditions, explanations, and consequences. Are you Samuel Lewis's sister? He asked. Yes, Danielle said. Her voice sounded steadier than she felt. I'm Danielle. The doctor nodded. I'm Dr. Peterson. Let's step over here for a moment. He gestured toward a quieter corner of the waiting area. Danielle followed, legs stiff, hands clenched at her sides. Julian stayed where he was at first, unsure whether he should give them privacy. Danielle noticed. It's okay, she said without looking back. He can stay. Julian froze for half a second, then followed, stopping a respectful distance away. Dr. Peterson glanced at him but didn't object. Samuel was brought in after collapsing at work, the doctor began. He was severely dehydrated and his blood pressure was dangerously low. He'd been pushing himself hard. Danielle nodded quickly. She already knew this part. She'd replayed it a dozen times in her head. We've stabilized him, Dr. Peterson continued. He's conscious now. That's the good news. The words hit her like a wave. Her knees weakened and she reached for the back of a chair to steady herself. He's awake, she asked. Yes, the doctor said. But he's not out of the woods. We're running additional tests. There may be an underlying condition that hasn't been diagnosed. Danielle swallowed. Can I see him? Not just yet, Dr. Peterson said gently. We need to monitor him for a bit longer. I promise we'll come get you when it's safe. She nodded, biting down hard on the inside of her cheek. Then the doctor added, carefully, I also need to ask, does Samuel have health insurance? There it was. Danielle felt the relief drain out of her body as quickly as it had come. No, she said. He doesn't. The doctor's face didn't change, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of calculation. Of reality. Okay, he said. That doesn't affect his care tonight. But once we have more information, we'll need to talk about next steps. Danielle nodded again, even though her thoughts were already racing. Tests meant bills. Monitoring meant time. Time meant money they didn't have. Dr. Peterson gave her a small, reassuring smile. He asked for you when he woke up. That broke her. Her shoulders sagged and she covered her mouth with her hand, a sharp breath escaping before she could stop it. Thank you, she whispered. The doctor excused himself and disappeared back through the sliding doors. For a moment, Danielle just stood there, staring at the spot where he'd been. Alive. Awake. The words echoed in her head, fragile and precious. Julian stepped closer, careful not to crowd her. That sounded hopeful, he said. It is, Danielle replied. For now. She sank back into the chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the worst moments was fading, leaving her hollowed out. Julian sat beside her again, leaving space between them. Your brother sounds tough, he said. She let out a short breath. He shouldn't have to be. They sat in silence for a while, the weight of what came next settling between them. Danielle stared at the floor, thoughts tumbling over each other. I should be at work, she said suddenly. I'm already late. Julian frowned. After this? If I don't show up, I don't get paid, she said. And if I don't get paid, she stopped herself, shaking her head. It doesn't matter. It matters, Julian said quietly. She glanced at him, surprised by the certainty in his voice. I can't stay all night, she continued. Visiting hours won't start until morning anyway. I'll come back before my shift ends. Julian hesitated, then said, Is there anyone else who can be here? Family? Danielle laughed softly, without humor. It's just me and him. Something about the way she said it, simple, final, hit Julian harder than he expected. He reached into his coat pocket, then stopped. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled his hand back out empty. If you need help figuring out logistics, he said carefully, rides, paperwork, anything like that, I can help. Danielle stiffened immediately. I'm not asking for money, she said, eyes sharp now. I didn't say you were. She studied his face, searching for something. Condescension. Pity. An angle. All due respect, she said, people like you don't usually offer help without strings. Julian met her gaze. Then don't take it. Just know the offer stands. She looked away, jaw tight. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, then answered. Danielle. Julian, he said. They exchanged a brief nod. A truce, not a friendship. Danielle stood, readying the apron around her waist with quick, practiced movements. I need to go, she said. But I'll be back. Julian watched her head toward the exit. Just before she reached the doors, he asked, Danielle, what's your last name? She paused, one hand on the glass. Lewis, she said without turning around. The word landed in Julian's chest like a dropped weight. Lewis. A name he hadn't heard spoken aloud in decades. The doors slid open and Danielle stepped out into the night. Julian remained seated, heart pounding, as a memory he'd buried long ago began to claw its way back to the surface. The name stayed with him long after the doors slid shut. Lewis. Julian sat frozen in his chair, the hum of the lights suddenly louder, sharper, like they were drilling straight into his skull. He tried to focus on the present, the waiting room, the smell of disinfectant, the distant sound of footsteps, but his mind had already drifted backward, pulled by a name he hadn't expected to hear again. He told himself it was a coincidence. Lewis wasn't rare. It was common enough that he could easily be reading too much into it. That was the rational explanation, the one that let him breathe again. The problem was his chest didn't loosen. His pulse didn't slow. Because something about the way Danielle had said it, flat, unembellished, almost defensive, felt familiar. Julian stood and walked toward the vending machines, more to move his body than because he wanted anything. He fed in a bill, watched it disappear, then forgot to press a button. The machine hummed uselessly. Across the room the clock ticked forward. He thought of his father. Not the public version. The polished interviews, the framed magazine covers in the office lobby. He thought of the man behind closed doors. Sure. Strategic. A man who believed consequences were things other people lived with. Julian shook his head, annoyed with himself. This wasn't the time. He retrieved a bottle of water, sat back down, and tried to let the night pass. But his attention kept drifting to the doors, half expecting Danielle to come back through them. She didn't. Instead, another hour crawled by. At some point, a nurse walked out and pinned a new notice to the bulletin board. Visiting hours. Policies. Rules written in bold letters that assumed everyone had options. Julian checked his phone again. Missed calls. Emails stacking up. A message from his driver asking if he should return. Not yet, Julian typed. He stood and paced near the glass doors, replaying the conversation over and over. The way Danielle had bristled at his offer. The speed with which she shut it down. Pride, yes, but also experience. The kind that comes from knowing exactly how quickly help turns into leverage. He didn't blame her. What unsettled him was how much he recognized it. The doors slid open suddenly. Julian turned, heart jumping, only to see Danielle stepping back inside. Her jacket was damp now, curls frizzed slightly from the cold air outside. The apron was still tied around her waist. She looked exhausted but determined, like someone who'd forced themselves through a wall of doubt and come out the other side. "You came back," Julian said before he could stop himself. She paused, surprised. "I forgot my phone charger," she replied. "And I wanted to check if they posted anything new." She scanned the bulletin board, then sighed. "Still nothing," she said. Julian nodded. "They're good at waiting." "That makes one of us," she said dryly. The corner of his mouth twitched despite himself. She noticed. "You almost smiled." "Almost," he admitted. She leaned against the wall near him, arms crossed. The distance between them felt smaller now, not physically but emotionally. Like they'd crossed some invisible line just by surviving the last hour in the same space. "You didn't leave," she said, more statement than question. "No." "Why?" Julian considered lying. "It would have been easier." "I didn't feel like I should," he said instead. She studied his face again, longer this time. "You don't seem like the type who sits in hospital waiting rooms for fun. Tonight's been full of surprises." She let out a tired laugh. "Tell me about it." Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't awkward. It felt cautious. Like both of them were aware that the next thing said might matter more than the ones before it. "My brother hates hospitals," Danielle said suddenly. "Says they smell like fear." Julian glanced around. "He's not wrong." "He made me promise I wouldn't let him die in one," she added quietly. "Guess I failed at that too." "You didn't," Julian said firmly. "He's alive." "For now," she replied. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She glanced at the screen, then exhaled. "Work," she said. "They want to know if I'm coming back." Julian waited. "I told them I'd be there in 20 minutes, she said. "Which is a lie." "You don't owe anyone the truth tonight," he said. She gave him a look. "Easy to say." He nodded. "Fair." She pushed off the wall. "I should go." Again. Julian hesitated, then asked, "Can I walk you out?" She frowned slightly, weighing it. "Okay," she said. "But just to the door." They walked side by side toward the exit. The night pressed in as the doors slid open, cold and sharp. Danielle stopped just outside, pulling her jacket tighter. She turned to him. "Listen, earlier. About the help thing. I didn't mean to." "You meant exactly what you said," Julian replied. "And I respect it." Her shoulders eased just a little. "Good," she said. "Because I can't afford to owe anyone." Julian nodded slowly. As she stepped away, he asked one more question, unable to hold it back. "Danielle, what was your mother's first name?" She stopped, turned. And the look she gave him told him he'd crossed into dangerous territory. "Why do you want to know that?" she asked. Julian opened his mouth to answer, and realized he wasn't sure he was ready for what that answer might uncover. The question hung between them like a wire pulled too tight. Danielle didn't answer right away. She studied Julian's face, searching for the reason behind the question. Not curiosity. Not politeness. Something else. Something that made her shoulders tense. "I don't see how that's relevant," she said finally. Julian nodded. "You're right. It isn't." The lie came easily, but it didn't sit well. He could tell she didn't believe him either. "Good night," Danielle said, the words clipped now. She turned and walked into the parking lot, her footsteps quick, purposeful. Julian watched until she disappeared into the darkness, the red taillights of passing cars briefly illuminating her silhouette before swallowing it whole. Then he exhaled. Slowly. He went back inside and sat down again, but the chair felt different now. Smaller. Less neutral. Like it knew something he didn't. Minutes passed. Then more. Julian checked the clock. Visiting hours were still a long way off. He should have gone home. Should have let the staff do their jobs. Should have returned to the world where problems came with contracts and solutions came with signatures. Instead he stayed. He replayed the conversation in fragments. Her brother. The apron. The way she said Louis. The way she flinched when he asked about her mother. His phone buzzed again. This time he answered. Yes, he said quietly. The voice on the other end was calm, efficient. We've confirmed what you asked. The name you gave, there was a case filed in '98. Wrongful termination. Class action, technically, but her claim was individual. Julian's stomach tightened. And? There was a settlement, the voice said. But it never reached the plaintiff directly. Julian closed his eyes. Where did it go? He asked. Pause. A few keystrokes. It was placed into a trust, the voice replied. Under your father's name. Julian ended the call without another word. For a long moment he just sat there, staring at the floor. The hum of the lights felt louder now. Accusatory. He'd always known his father had been ruthless. He hadn't known he'd been this precise. The doors slid open again. Julian looked up, heart racing, but it wasn't Danielle. It was a nurse scanning the room. Family of Samuel Lewis? Julian stood instinctively, then stopped himself. No, that wasn't his place. A second later, Danielle rushed in, breathless, hair slightly undone, as if she'd run the last few steps from her car. I'm here, she said. I'm family. The nurse nodded. You can come back for a few minutes. Danielle glanced around, surprised to see Julian still there. You stayed, she said softly. I said I would, he replied. She hesitated, then turned back to the nurse. Okay. Before she followed, Julian spoke again, choosing his words carefully. Danielle, whatever happens next, he said, you don't have to handle it alone. She looked at him, eyes tired but sharp. You keep saying things like that. Because they're true. She held his gaze for a beat longer, then shook her head. We'll see, she said. The doors closed behind her. Julian sat back down, pulse thudding in his ears. He tried to imagine Danielle standing beside her brother's bed. Tried to imagine what she'd say to him. Tried not to imagine what would happen if the truth came out too soon or too late. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, Danielle emerged again. Her face looked different now. Not relieved. Not panicked. Focused. He's stable, she said when she reached Julian. Still weak. They think he collapsed from exhaustion on top of something else. They're running more tests. That's good, Julian said. It's information, she replied. Good comes later. She sat down heavily, rubbing her hands together as if they were cold. They asked about insurance again, she added. About payment plans. Julian nodded, jaw tight. I told them I'd figure it out, Danielle said. I always do. She laughed once quietly. It wasn't humor. It was habit. Julian leaned forward. Danielle, I need to tell you something. She turned toward him slowly. What? He hesitated. Because once he said it, there would be no undoing it. No returning to polite distance or neutral concern. I think, he said carefully, that what's happening to your family didn't start tonight. Her eyes narrowed. What do you mean? Julian swallowed. I think it started a long time ago, he said. And I think my family may be part of the reason. Danielle stared at him, the noise of the waiting room fading into the background. For a second she didn't breathe. Then she said very quietly, You need to be very sure before you say something like that. Julian met her gaze. I am, he said, and the weight of what he was about to reveal settled heavily between them, threatening to crack the fragile understanding they'd built. Danielle didn't respond right away. She stared at Julian like she was trying to decide whether he was reckless or cruel, or something worse. Her fingers tightened around the apron still looped at her waist, the fabric creasing under the pressure. "Say that again," she said slowly. Julian didn't. Not immediately. The waiting room felt smaller now, like the walls had shifted closer. A TV mounted in the corner played a muted news segment. Closed captions scrolled beneath a smiling anchor talking about weather. It felt obscene. "I'm not trying to accuse," Julian said finally. "And I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm just telling you what I know." Danielle let out a short breath. "You don't know anything about us." "That's fair," he said. "But I know my father. And I know the company he ran." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't a courtroom. If you're going to say something, say it." Julian nodded once. "My father owned an electronics manufacturing plant outside Dayton," he said. "Late 90s. Early 2000s. He shut it down with very little warning." Danielle's face changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it does in movies. It went still. "You should stop," she said quietly. "I can't," Julian replied. "Not anymore." She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the floor. A few people glanced over. Danielle didn't care. "My mother worked at a plant like that," she said. "She lost her job overnight. No severance. No warning. No apology." Julian swallowed. "What was her name?" Danielle shook her head. "No. You don't get that." "I understand," he said quickly. "You don't have to tell me." She stared at him, chest rising and falling. "You come into my night," she said, voice low, controlled, "while my brother is lying in a hospital bed, and you tell me your family might be part of why our lives look the way they do?" Julian nodded. "Yes." She laughed once. It was sharp. Defensive. "That's convenient," she said. "You feel bad, so now it's a story. A connection. Something to explain why you're here." "That's not." "You don't get to make this meaningful," she cut in. "It already is." A nurse glanced in their direction, concern flickering across her face. Danielle noticed and lowered her voice. "My mother worked herself sick after that plant closed," she said. "Cleaning offices. Scrubbing bathrooms. She died believing she failed us." Julian's throat tightened. "I didn't know," he said. "Of course you didn't," Danielle replied. "Why would you?" She sat back down slowly, hands shaking now despite her effort to steady them. "And now," she continued, "you show up here. With your nice coat. Your calm voice. And you want to talk about responsibility?" Julian didn't interrupt. He let the words land. "I don't want to erase anything," he said when she finished. "I want to understand what I inherited." Danielle looked at him sharply. "You inherited everything." The words hung in the air, heavy and unarguable. Before Julian could respond, the sliding doors opened again. Dr. Peterson stepped out, scanning the room. His gaze landed on Danielle. "Danielle Lewis?" She was on her feet instantly, anger and fear colliding in her chest. "Yes. We've completed some initial tests," the doctor said. "Samuel's heart rate has stabilized, but there's something else we need to discuss." Danielle's breath caught. "What?" The doctor hesitated, choosing his words. "There are signs of a chronic condition. It's manageable, but it explains why pushing himself the way he did was dangerous." "Is he?" Danielle stopped herself. "Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable," Dr. Peterson said. "But this changes things. He'll need follow-up care. Medication. Lifestyle adjustments." Danielle nodded, even as her mind raced ahead to costs, schedules, what this would mean for both of them. "Can I see him?" she asked. The doctor nodded. "For a few minutes." She turned back to Julian. "Whatever you think you're part of," she said quietly, We're not having this conversation right now. I understand, Julian said. She followed the doctor through the doors without another look back. Julian remained standing, heart pounding. He watched the doors close behind her. For the first time that night, he felt certain of something. This wasn't just about the past. Whatever truth waited beneath it was going to demand something from him, and from her, that neither of them was ready to give. And inside that room, with machines humming and answers still incomplete, Danielle was about to hear words that would make walking away impossible. Danielle stood beside Samuel's hospital bed, watching the slow, mechanical rise and fall of his chest. The room smelled like antiseptic and warm plastic. Monitors blinked softly, their rhythmic beeping too calm for the storm inside her head. Samuel looked smaller than usual, swallowed by white sheets and wires taped to his skin. The tough little brother who worked double shifts and joked through exhaustion was gone. This version was fragile, breakable. She reached for his hand. It was cold. "You scared me," she whispered. Samuel's eyelids fluttered, then slowly opened. Confusion passed over his face before recognition settled in. "Hey Dee," he murmured. His voice was hoarse. "Why are you crying?" She hadn't realized she was. "I'm not," she said quickly, swiping at her cheek. "You just decided to be dramatic tonight." He tried to smile, but it faded. "Guess I messed up." Her grip tightened. "You didn't mess up. You pushed yourself because you always do. Because you think stopping means failing." Samuel looked away toward the window, where dawn was just beginning to tint the sky gray. "They said something to you?" he said quietly. Danielle froze. "What do you mean?" "The doctor," Samuel replied. He had that look. The serious one. She hesitated. Lying felt wrong. But so did telling the full truth when he was still weak. "They found something," she said carefully. "A condition. It explains why you collapsed." Samuel closed his eyes. A long breath left him. "So I'm broken." "No," Danielle said instantly. "You're human." He gave a humorless chuckle. "Doesn't feel like much of a difference." She leaned closer. "Listen to me. This doesn't mean you stop living. It means you stop killing yourself trying to survive." Silence stretched between them. After a moment, Samuel spoke again. "How much is this going to cost?" Danielle's chest tightened. There it was. The question he always asked first. "I'll figure it out," she said. "You always say that." "And I always do." Samuel turned his head slightly, studying her face. "You shouldn't have to." Before she could answer, there was a soft knock at the door. Danielle turned, irritation flashing through her exhaustion. Julian stood there. He looked out of place in the small hospital room, like someone who'd wandered into a life he wasn't meant to touch. His eyes moved from Samuel to Danielle, cautious, almost apologetic. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I didn't mean to interrupt." Danielle stiffened. "You should have waited." "You're right," Julian said. "I just wanted to check if he was okay." Samuel frowned. "Who's that?" Danielle hesitated, then sighed. "Julian." "That's it?" Samuel asked, eyebrow lifting. "Just Julian?" Julian stepped forward slightly. "Julian Grant." Samuel's eyes sharpened. The name landed differently now. "Grant?" he repeated. "Like Grant Industries?" Danielle shot Julian a look. "You didn't need to say that." Julian met her gaze. "I didn't want to hide." Samuel studied him more closely, then laughed softly. "Figures." "Figures what?" Danielle asked. "That a Grant would be standing in my hospital room," Samuel replied. "Guess life's got a sense of humor." Julian swallowed. "I'm sorry." Samuel tilted his head. "For what?" "For the things my family built by tearing others down," Julian said. "Including people like your mother." The room went quiet. Danielle's heart pounded. "Julian?" Samuel raised a weak hand. "No. Let him talk." Julian exhaled. "I can't change what happened. But I can choose what happens next. Samuel watched him for a long moment. People like you always say that, he said finally. Then they leave. Julian didn't look away. I'm still here. Samuel glanced at Danielle. Something unreadable passed between them. Well, he said slowly, if you're here, then maybe you can answer one question. Julian nodded. Anything. Samuel's voice was steady, but his eyes weren't. Are you going to walk away when helping us costs you something real? The question hit harder than any accusation. Julian opened his mouth, but no words came. And in that silence, Danielle realized this wasn't just about whether Julian meant well. It was about whether he was willing to lose something to prove it. And that answer would change all of their lives. Julian didn't answer Samuel's question right away. The machines kept beeping, steady and indifferent. Somewhere down the hall, a cart rattled. A nurse laughed quietly at a desk. Life kept moving while the moment waited. I don't know yet, Julian said finally. Danielle's stomach dropped. Samuel didn't look surprised. He nodded once like he'd expected that answer all along. That's the honest one, Samuel said. I'll give you that. Julian shifted his weight. I'm not trying to protect myself. I just don't want to make promises I can't keep. Danielle folded her arms. You already made one, she said. By coming here. Julian met her eyes. I know. Samuel watched them, a faint tension tightening his jaw. You two have history. Danielle opened her mouth to deny it, then stopped. We have circumstances. Julian gave a small, sad smile. That's one way to put it. A nurse stepped in, checking Samuel's vitals. The interruption broke the moment, but not the weight of it. When she left, Samuel looked more tired than before. I'm going to sleep, he said. Doctor said I should. Danielle squeezed his hand. I'll be right outside. Samuel's fingers tightened briefly around hers. Then his eyes flicked to Julian. You're still here when I wake up, he said. It wasn't a request. Julian nodded. I will be. Samuel closed his eyes. Outside the room, Danielle leaned against the wall and let out a breath she'd been holding for hours. Her legs felt weak. Julian stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, staring at the floor. That could have gone better, he said quietly. You think? Danielle replied. He winced. Fair. They stood in silence. A janitor passed by, pushing a mop bucket. The smell of disinfectant followed him. Julian spoke again. I didn't expect him to recognize my name. He's not stupid, Danielle said. Neither am I. I know. She turned to face him. Then why are you here, Julian? Not the polite answer. The real one. He hesitated. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked unsure. Because I can't pretend I didn't see you crying outside the ER, he said. And because walking away felt worse than staying. Danielle laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. That's not enough. I know, he said. But it's where I'm starting. She studied him, searching for cracks. 4 signs of performance. She found none. Just exhaustion. And something like guilt. My brother doesn't trust people like you, she said. And honestly, neither do I. I don't blame you. She shook her head. That's not an apology. I wasn't offering one, Julian said. Not yet. Danielle pushed off the wall. Then here's what you should know. The doctors think Samuel has a condition that didn't get caught early. He ignored symptoms because he couldn't afford not to work. Treatment won't be quick. Or cheap. Julian's jaw tightened. How much? They don't know yet. But it's serious. Yes. Julian exhaled slowly. Okay. That word sat between them, heavy and undefined. Okay, what? Danielle asked. Okay. I'm listening. She frowned. Listening doesn't keep the lights on. No, he said. But it's the step before doing something reckless. Her voice sharpened. You think we haven't been reckless our whole lives just trying to survive? Julian looked at her. Really looked. I think you've been carrying too much alone. The words landed harder than she expected. She turned away, blinking. Don't. I'm not pitying you, he said. I'm acknowledging reality. Danielle crossed her arms again, defensive. Reality is your family built their wealth off neighborhoods like mine. Off workers like my mother. So if you're here to ease your conscience. I'm here because I want to help, Julian interrupted. And because I know help comes with strings whether we admit it or not. She turned back. What strings? Transparency, he said. Boundaries. And time. Time is the one thing we don't have. Julian nodded. Then I'll move faster. Before Danielle could respond, the doctor appeared at the end of the hall, scanning a clipboard. Family of Samuel Carter? He called. Danielle's heart jumped. She stepped forward. I'm his sister. The doctor's expression was neutral, practiced. We need to talk, he said. There's something new on his scans. Julian straightened beside her. Danielle didn't notice at first. But as she followed the doctor down the hall, she realized Julian was walking with her. And for the first time she didn't tell him to stop. Because whatever the doctor was about to say felt like it was about to change everything. The doctor led them into a small consultation room with beige walls and a single window that looked out over the parking garage. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Danielle hated rooms like this. They were where hope got rearranged. Samuel was wheeled in a few minutes later, still groggy but awake. His eyes searched Danielle's face immediately. What's wrong? He asked. The doctor closed the door gently. We reviewed your latest scans, he said, taking a seat. There's more going on than we initially thought. Danielle felt her pulse in her ears. Samuel's voice stayed steady. Just say it. The doctor nodded. You have a structural issue with your heart that's been developing for years. It's manageable, but only if we intervene properly. Julian leaned against the wall, quiet, alert. What kind of intervention? Samuel asked. Medication to stabilize things short-term, the doctor said. But longer-term you'll need a procedure. Possibly surgery. The word landed like a dropped plate. Danielle gripped the edge of the chair. How soon? Sooner is better, the doctor replied. Waiting increases the risk. Samuel swallowed. Risk of what? Of sudden failure, the doctor said gently. You were lucky this time. Silence filled the room. Danielle looked at Samuel. He was staring at his hands now, flexing his fingers like he was counting something only he could see. How much? He asked again. The doctor hesitated. That depends on insurance coverage. Samuel laughed quietly. I don't have any. Julian straightened. Danielle spoke quickly. He works contract jobs. Nothing permanent. The doctor nodded, unsurprised. We'll connect you with a financial counselor. There may be assistance programs. May, Samuel repeated. Yes. The doctor stood. I'll give you some time. When the door closed, the room felt smaller. Samuel broke the silence. So that's it. I either come up with money I don't have, or I wait and hope my heart behaves. Danielle shook her head. You're not doing this alone. Samuel looked at her. You can't fix this by skipping meals and working extra shifts. Julian cleared his throat. They both turned to him. I can help, he said. Samuel raised an eyebrow. There it is. Julian didn't flinch. Not alone. Not charity. Danielle crossed her arms. Then what? I can cover the procedure, Julian said. Quietly. Through a foundation. Samuel's expression hardened. No. Julian blinked. You didn't even hear the terms. There are always terms, Samuel said. I won't owe you. You wouldn't, Julian replied. There'd be no strings. Danielle shook her head. That's easy to say. Julian's voice stayed calm. I know how it sounds, but I'm serious. Samuel leaned back in his chair, studying him. You know what happens when people like you help people like us? Julian waited. They feel good, Samuel continued. And then they move on. And we're left with reminders that we couldn't do it ourselves. Julian nodded slowly. I won't pretend I understand everything you've lived through. But I do know what it's like to inherit damage you didn't personally cause. That's not the same, Danielle snapped. No, Julian agreed. It's not. Samuel looked between them. If you do this, he said to Julian, you don't get to be a hero. Julian met his gaze. I don't want to be. Then why? Samuel asked. Julian hesitated. Just a second too long. Danielle noticed. Say it, she said. The real reason. Julian exhaled. Because my family's company fought a lawsuit years ago. About unsafe conditions. Your mother was a witness. The room went still. Danielle's breath caught. What? Julian's eyes dropped. I found her name when I started digging. She was injured on the job. She testified. Then she lost her position. Samuel's jaw clenched. That was you. It was before I had any control, Julian said. But it was my family. Danielle felt the floor tilt. You knew this, and you waited until now to tell us. I didn't want to turn help into leverage, Julian said. But you deserve the truth. Samuel laughed once, sharp and bitter. So this is guilt. Julian looked up. It started that way. I won't lie. Danielle's chest burned. Memories rushed back. Her mother coming home exhausted. Quiet. Hurt. The way bills piled up after the injury. The way everything changed. But it's not just that anymore, Julian continued. I stay because I care what happens next. Samuel stood, unsteady but determined. Then here's what happens next. You don't buy my life to balance your conscience. Julian took a step forward. I'm offering to protect your future. No, Samuel said. You're offering to rewrite the past. Danielle reached out, steadying her brother. The door opened suddenly. A nurse peeked in. We need to take him back for monitoring. As Samuel was wheeled out, he looked at Julian one last time. You want to help? He said quietly. Then prove you can handle hearing no. Julian watched them leave, his face tight with something like regret. Danielle lingered at the doorway. You should go, she said. Julian nodded. I will. But this isn't over. She didn't answer. As the door closed behind her, Danielle wondered whether opening that old wound had just saved her brother's life, or set them on a path that would cost far more than any hospital bill. Danielle didn't sleep that night. She sat in the hard plastic chair beside Samuel's bed, listening to the steady hum of machines and the occasional shuffle of nurses' shoes in the hallway. Every time Samuel's breathing changed, even slightly, her body tensed. Morning light crept through the narrow window, pale and unforgiving. Samuel woke slowly. He didn't look at her right away. You still mad? He asked. Danielle rubbed her eyes. I don't know what I am. He nodded. Fair. They sat in silence for a while. The kind that wasn't awkward, just heavy. The kind that came from years of shared struggle and unspoken fear. I shouldn't have pushed you, Samuel said finally. About Julian. Danielle turned to him. You weren't wrong. I wasn't right either, he said. I don't trust him. But I don't trust this situation more. She exhaled. Neither do I. Samuel stared at the ceiling. I keep thinking about Mom. Danielle's chest tightened. Me too. She stood up to them, he continued. Did everything right. And still paid for it. And she never complained, Danielle said softly. Not once. Samuel swallowed. I don't want to end up like that. Quietly broken. Danielle reached for his hand again. This time it was warmer. You won't, she said. Not if I can help it. He looked at her. That's the problem, Dee. You always think it's on you. Before she could respond, a knock came at the door. Danielle turned, already bracing herself. It wasn't Julian. A woman in her early 40s stepped in, holding a tablet. She wore a blazer over scrubs, her expression professional but kind. "I'm Karen Lewis," she said. "Hospital Social Services." Danielle straightened. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing urgent," Karen replied. "I wanted to talk about options." Samuel snorted quietly. "Options? That's a nice word." Karen smiled politely. "It's the best one I have." She pulled up a chair. "There are programs for patients without insurance, payment plans, nonprofits." Danielle leaned forward. "Will any of them cover surgery?" Karen hesitated. "Just enough." "Partially," she said. "In some cases." Samuel closed his eyes. "Meaning I still drown." Danielle's jaw tightened. "What about foundations?" Karen glanced at her tablet. "There are private ones. But approval can take time. And they usually require documentation." "What kind?" Samuel asked. "Employment records. Family income. Sometimes legal history related to workplace injury claims." Danielle froze. Karen noticed. "Is that a concern?" Samuel looked at Danielle, then back at Karen. "Our mother testified in a lawsuit years ago." Karen nodded slowly. "That would be relevant." Danielle's heart pounded. "Relevant how?" Karen chose her words carefully. "Some foundations are tied, directly or indirectly, to corporate donors. Prior litigation can complicate things." Samuel laughed bitterly. "So we're still paying for that." Karen didn't disagree. "I wish I could say otherwise." After she left, the room felt colder. Danielle stood and paced. "This is impossible." Samuel watched her. "You're thinking about him." She stopped. "Don't." "You are," he said gently. Danielle pressed her palms together. "I hate that he's our only real option." Samuel nodded. "I hate that too." A phone buzzed in Danielle's pocket. A known number. She stared at it. "Answer it," Samuel said. She hesitated, then stepped into the hallway. "Hello?" "Danielle?" Julian's voice said. "I know you told me to go. I won't come back to the room. I spoke to someone." Her chest tightened. "You shouldn't be calling." "I know," he said. "But I found something. About the lawsuit. About your mother." Danielle leaned against the wall. "What?" "There were internal documents," Julian continued. "Suppressed ones. They never made it to court." Her breath caught. "What do they say?" "That the company knew the equipment was faulty," he said. "And that witnesses were pressured afterward." Danielle's hands shook. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because one of those documents has your mother's name on it," Julian said. "And because if it comes out, it could change everything." She closed her eyes. "You expect me to trust you with this?" "No," Julian replied. "I expect you to decide whether the truth is worth reopening old wounds." Down the hall, a nurse rushed past, calling for a doctor. Danielle's heart leapt. "What's happening?" she asked Julian, suddenly afraid. "I don't know," he said. "Why?" She looked toward Samuel's room as alarms began to chirp louder. "I need to go," she said, already moving. "Danielle," Julian said urgently. "Whatever happens next." She hung up. As she ran toward her brother's room, fear clawed at her chest. Because the past had just knocked on their door. And it didn't sound like it was asking permission to come in. The alarms weren't loud enough to be dramatic. That was what scared Danielle most. They chirped in short, sharp bursts, like a warning someone was trying not to panic about. She reached Samuel's room just as two nurses rushed in ahead of her. One of them gently but firmly stopped Danielle at the doorway. "Give us a second," the nurse said. Danielle craned her neck, trying to see past them. Samuel was half sitting, half slumped, one hand gripping the rail of the bed. His face was pale, lips slightly blue around the edges. "Sam?" she called. His eyes found hers. He tried to say something but instead coughed, a dry, rattling sound that made Danielle's stomach twist. A doctor appeared, moving fast but controlled. Orders were given. Monitors were adjusted. Oxygen was increased. Danielle stood frozen, nails digging into her palms. "Ma'am," the nurse said softly, guiding her backward. "Please step outside." "I'm not leaving," Danielle snapped. The nurse met her eyes. "I promise we'll take care of him. But you need to give us room." Reluctantly, Danielle stepped back into the hallway. The door swung shut. She stared at it. Seconds felt like minutes. Minutes felt endless. Her phone buzzed again in her pocket. She ignored it. Whatever Julian had uncovered, whatever truths were clawing their way to the surface, none of it mattered if Samuel didn't make it through the next 10 minutes. She slid down against the wall, pulling her knees to her chest. This was her fault, a small voice whispered. If she'd pushed harder sooner. If she'd forced him to see a doctor. If she'd found a better job. If she'd been more than just barely enough. The door opened. Danielle shot to her feet. The doctor stepped out, removing his gloves. His expression wasn't calm. But it wasn't hopeless either. "He's stable," the doctor said. "For now." Danielle's knees nearly gave out. "What happened?" "A brief arrhythmia," he replied. "It corrected itself, but it's another sign we shouldn't wait." "Wait for what?" she asked, though she already knew. "Surgery," the doctor said. "Soon." "How soon?" Her voice trembled. "Days," he said. "Not weeks." Danielle nodded, even though her mind felt like static. "Can I see him?" "In a moment," the doctor said. "Let him rest." When the doctor walked away, Danielle realized her phone was still vibrating in her hand. She looked down. 3 missed calls. All from Julian. She stepped away from the room before answering. "What?" she said, sharper than she meant to. "I heard alarms," Julian said. "I was still in the building." "Is he?" "He almost crashed," Danielle cut in. "So if you're calling to talk about documents or lawsuits." "I'm calling because this just got urgent," Julian said. "And because I found something else." Danielle closed her eyes. "You really don't know how to stop, do you?" "This isn't about me," he said. "The suppressed files include internal medical assessments. They knew injuries like your mother's could lead to long-term heart complications in family members. Genetic risk. They buried it." Her heart thudded painfully. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Samuel's condition might not be random," Julian replied. "It might be connected." The hallway felt like it tilted. "That's not possible," Danielle whispered. "I thought the same," Julian said. "But the data lines up. And if that connection is established, the company could be liable for his care." Danielle laughed once hollow. "So now you're saying your family's company broke my mother and my brother?" "I'm saying they may have," Julian replied quietly. "And if that's true, the surgery, the treatment, none of it should be on you." Danielle pressed her forehead against the wall. Her whole body shook. "You're asking me to trust you again," she said. "I'm asking you to let me bring this to an attorney who isn't tied to my family," Julian replied. "Someone independent." "And what does that cost you?" she asked. Pause. "Everything," Julian said. "If this moves forward, I won't be able to protect my position. Or my name." She pulled back from the wall. "You expect me to believe that?" "No," he said. "I expect you to decide what's more important. Silence. Or answers." Down the hall, Samuel's door opened again. A nurse motioned for Danielle. She took a breath. "I have to go." "I'll be here," Julian said. "Whatever you decide." Danielle ended the call and walked back into the room. Samuel was awake again, eyes tired but alert. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. She sat beside him, taking his hand. "Sam," she said carefully, "what if this wasn't just bad luck?" He frowned. "What do you mean?" Danielle swallowed. "What if what happened to Mom didn't stop with her?" Samuel stared at her, confusion slowly giving way to something darker. "What are you saying, Dee?" She didn't answer right away. Because once she said it out loud, there would be no going back. And the truth, whatever it was already starting to demand its price. Danielle took a long breath before she spoke. Julian thinks your condition might be connected to what happened to Mom, she said. Samuel stared at her like she'd spoken another language. Connected how? She chose her words carefully. The company she testified against, they had internal medical reports. Warnings. About long-term risks. About family members. Samuel shook his head slowly. That sounds like a stretch. I thought so too, Danielle said. But then you collapsed. And then today happened. He looked away, jaw tight. So now I'm sick because of them. I don't know, she said. But I know they hid things. And I know Mom paid the price. Samuel laughed quietly, but it came out rough. She didn't want us carrying that anger. Danielle's eyes burned. She didn't want us carrying secrets either. Silence settled between them. After a moment, Samuel spoke again. What does Julian want? To take this to an independent attorney, Danielle said. Someone not tied to his family. And what does he get? Samuel asked. He loses his position, Danielle replied. Possibly his name. Samuel looked back at her, searching her face. Do you believe him? Danielle hesitated. I believe he's torn. I don't know if that makes him trustworthy. Samuel closed his eyes. This is too big. A nurse came in to adjust and for. When she left, Samuel exhaled slowly. If this is real, he said, then my surgery isn't charity. It's responsibility. Danielle nodded. Exactly. And if it's not? He asked. Then we walk away, she said. Together. Samuel looked at the ceiling. Mom would hate that this is coming back. She'd hate more that they got away with it, Danielle replied. Another pause. Call him, Samuel said. Danielle's heart jumped. Are you sure? I'm sure of one thing, he said. I don't want to die wondering if the truth was sitting right there. She stepped into the hallway again and dialed Julian's number. He answered immediately. I was hoping you'd call. We're listening, Danielle said. That's all. That's enough, Julian replied. They met later that afternoon in a quiet corner of the hospital cafeteria. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. Julian looked exhausted, his tie loosened, dark circles under his eyes. I spoke to an attorney, he said without preamble. Eleanor Price. She specializes in corporate liability. She's not on my family's payroll. Danielle crossed her arms. Does she know who you are? Yes, Julian said. And she still agreed to meet. Samuel leaned back in his wheelchair. What's her angle? She thinks there's a case, Julian replied. But it won't be quick. And it won't be quiet. Samuel snorted. Nothing ever is. Julian slid a folder across the table. These are copies of the documents. Medical memos. Internal emails. Danielle flipped through them. Dates. Redacted names. One familiar surname jumped out. Carter. Her hands shook. They knew, she whispered. Yes, Julian said. And they paid to keep it buried. Samuel closed the folder. If this goes public, surgery gets covered? Eventually, Julian said. But the hospital won't wait for a lawsuit. Danielle looked up. Then what? Julian took a breath. I confront the cost. Temporarily. Not as a favor. As an advance against liability. Samuel frowned. That's still your money. It won't be, Julian said. Not if the case moves forward. And if it doesn't? Samuel pressed. Julian met his eyes. Then I absorb it. Not you. Danielle studied him. Why are you doing this? Julian didn't answer right away. He looked down at his hands. Because I grew up thinking silence was neutral, he said finally. And I was wrong. Samuel nodded slowly. You understand this puts a target on you. I know, Julian replied. And on us, Danielle added. Yes, Julian said. I know. Samuel wheeled himself back slightly. Then here's the deal. You don't speak for us. You don't decide our story. You don't control the timeline. Julian nodded. Agreed. And if at any point this feels like it's becoming about your redemption, Samuel continued, we shut it down. Julian didn't hesitate. Agreed. Danielle exhaled. We'll meet the attorney. Relief flickered across Julian's face, quickly replaced by resolve. There's one more thing, he said. Danielle stiffened. What? The documents mention other families, Julian said. Similar patterns. Similar outcomes. Samuel's eyes hardened. How many? Julian swallowed. Enough that this won't stay small. The weight of that settled over the table. Danielle looked at her brother. He nodded once. Then we're not just fighting for us, Samuel said quietly. Julian met their gaze. No, you're not. As they stood to leave, Danielle felt a strange mix of fear and clarity, because the story she thought was about survival was turning into something else entirely. And once the truth started moving, it wouldn't stop with just one family. The meeting with the attorney happened 2 days later, in a quiet office building a few miles from the hospital. Danielle noticed the security first. Not obvious but intentional. A locked elevator. A receptionist who didn't look up names aloud. Eleanor Price didn't rush out to greet them. She waited until the door closed behind them before speaking. Everything you say in this room stays here, Eleanor said. Unless you decide otherwise. She was in her late 50s, silver hair pulled back, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She didn't smile much, but she didn't need to. Authority sat easily on her. Samuel sat straighter in his chair. Julian placed the folder on the table. Eleanor didn't touch it yet. I know who you are, she said to Julian. And I know what this costs you if it's real. Julian nodded. I'm prepared for that. Eleanor finally opened the folder, flipping through pages with practiced speed. She stopped at one document, then another. Her expression changed. Not shock. Recognition. They buried this badly, she said. Which tells me they were afraid. Danielle leaned forward. Afraid of what? Patterns, Eleanor replied. Individual cases can be dismissed. Patterns can't. Samuel spoke quietly. Does my condition fit? Eleanor looked at him carefully. It fits enough to matter. Danielle's stomach twisted. Enough for surgery coverage? Eleanor exhaled. Eventually. But you need to understand something. This won't move at the speed of a hospital clock. Samuel nodded. I figured. What I need from you, Eleanor continued, is permission to dig into your mother's records. Medical, employment, everything. Danielle stiffened. She's not here to consent. She left a trail, Eleanor said gently. And from what I've seen, she was careful. Julian shifted in his seat. How exposed am I? Eleanor didn't sugarcoat it. If this becomes public, your family will fight. Art. You will be framed as disloyal at best. Complicit at worst. Julian accepted that without comment. Eleanor closed the folder. I'll take the case. But there's a condition. Samuel raised an eyebrow. There's always a condition. Eleanor met his gaze. No side deals. No quiet settlements. If this moves forward, it moves forward fully. Danielle's heart pounded. What if we just want the medical part handled? Eleanor shook her head. That's not how leverage works. Silence followed. Samuel was the one who broke it. We didn't come this far to stop halfway. Eleanor nodded once. Good. Then here's the next reality. Once we file, your lives will change. People will watch. Dig. Ask questions you don't want to answer. Danielle thought of her job. Her coworkers. The way rumors spread faster than truth. We'll manage, she said, even though she wasn't sure how. The meeting ended with handshakes that felt heavier than they should. Back at the hospital, Samuel was prepped for surgery scheduling. consent forms, pre-op tests, timelines that were suddenly too real. Danielle watched him sign his name, hands steady. "You're not scared?" she asked quietly. He smiled faintly. "Terrified. Just tired of pretending I'm not." That night, Danielle finally went home. Her apartment felt smaller than she remembered. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall where old family photos used to hang. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You should stop. This won't end the way you think." Her chest tightened. Another message followed. "Your mother already paid the price." Danielle's hands shook as she typed back. "Who is this?" The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. "You're not as protected as you think." She stared at the screen, pulse racing. A knock came at her door. She froze. The knock came again, firmer this time. "Danielle?" A man's voice called. "Hospital security. We need to speak with you." Her heart slammed against her ribs. She slipped the phone into her pocket and opened the door a crack. Two uniformed officers stood there, expressions neutral. "Is something wrong?" she asked. "One of the documents you submitted triggered a flag," one of them said. "We just need to ask a few questions." "About what?" Danielle asked. The officer glanced at his partner. "About your mother," he said. As they stepped inside, Danielle realized something had shifted. This wasn't just legal anymore. Someone had noticed, and they weren't happy about it. The officers didn't sit. They stood just inside Danielle's living room, hands resting casually near their belts, eyes scanning the space the way people do when they're trained to notice everything. The room felt suddenly exposed. Too quiet. "This won't take long," the taller officer said. His voice was polite. Too polite. Danielle crossed her arms to steady herself. "You said a document triggered a flag." "What document?" "The employment records you submitted through counsel," the other officer replied. "From your mother's former workplace." Danielle frowned. "Those records are decades old." "Yes," he said. "Which is why it caught attention." "Attention from who?" Danielle asked. The taller officer exchanged a glance with his partner. "From an internal compliance review." "That doesn't sound like hospital business," Danielle said. "It isn't," the officer admitted. "But when large institutions see potential exposure, they tend to coordinate." Danielle felt a chill. "Coordinate with who?" "Legal departments. Risk management. Sometimes security," he said. "So why are you here?" she pressed. "I haven't broken any laws." "We're not saying you have," the second officer replied. "We just want to make sure no documents were obtained improperly." Danielle laughed once, sharp and humorless. "My mother kept copies in a box under her bed." The officers didn't smile. "Do you still have them?" the taller one asked. Danielle hesitated. "Some." "We'd advise you to turn them over," he said. "For review." "Advise?" she repeated. "Yes," he said. "Advise." Danielle held his gaze. "No." The room went still. "That's your right," the officer said after a moment. "But understand this. When things escalate, they rarely stay clean." They turned to leave. At the door, the second officer paused. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "this isn't coming from the hospital." The door closed behind them. Danielle stood there long after they were gone, heart pounding. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. "This is your last warning." She didn't respond this time. Instead, she called Julian. He answered on the first ring. "I was just about to call you." "Someone's watching," Danielle said. "They came to my apartment." Julian went silent. Then, "Did they identify themselves?" "Hospital security," she replied. "But they admitted it wasn't hospital business." Julian exhaled sharply. "That means my family's legal team has activated containment." Danielle's anger flared. "You said you couldn't protect your position." "I can't," Julian said. "But I know how they operate. This is pressure." They want to scare you into backing down before filings become public. And if we don't? Danielle asked. Then it gets louder, he said. And uglier. She closed her eyes. Samuel's surgery is scheduled for Friday. I know, Julian said. I just got the confirmation. And if something happens to him before then? Her voice cracked. It won't, Julian said firmly. I won't let that happen. You can't promise that, she snapped. No, he agreed. But I can stay close. The next morning, Eleanor called an emergency meeting. This is expected, she said calmly when Danielle explained what happened. But it confirms something important. What? Samuel asked from his hospital bed. They're afraid, Eleanor replied. Enough to overreach. Samuel frowned. Is that good or bad? It means we're close to something real, Eleanor said. But it also means they may try to isolate you. Danielle's chest tightened. How? By discrediting your mother, Eleanor said. Or reframing her as unreliable. Samuel's hands clenched. They don't get to touch her. They will try, Eleanor said. Which is why we move now. She slid a document across the table. This accelerates the filing. Once this is submitted, they can't quietly erase you. Danielle stared at the paper. What does it cost? Privacy, Eleanor replied. Peace. And the illusion that powerful people play fair. Samuel looked at Danielle. You don't have to do this. She met his eyes. Yes, I do. Julian arrived later that afternoon, his presence drawing stares from staff who suddenly seemed to recognize him. You shouldn't be here, Danielle said when she saw him. I know, he replied. But I needed to tell you something in person. What? Samuel asked. Julian looked between them. My family offered me a deal. Danielle's stomach dropped. What kind of deal? If I step away from the case publicly, Julian said, they'll cover the surgery. No questions. No exposure. Silence swallowed the room. And? Samuel asked. Julian swallowed. I said no. Danielle studied his face. Why? Because they didn't deny the documents, Julian said. They just wanted them buried again. Samuel nodded slowly. Then we're doing the right thing. Julian let out a shaky breath. There's something else. Once the filing goes through, they may retaliate financially. Freeze accounts. Cut access. Danielle straightened. Against who? Julian met her gaze. Against me. Samuel's eyes narrowed. You knew that and still stayed? Julian nodded. I made my choice. The room went quiet. Outside the window, clouds rolled in heavy and dark. Danielle looked at the filing papers again, then at her brother, pale but determined. Friday, she said softly. Friday, Samuel echoed. And as the hospital lights flickered briefly, just once, Danielle couldn't shake the feeling that the countdown had already started. Not just to surgery, but to a fight none of them could walk away from anymore. Friday arrived without ceremony. No dramatic sunrise. No sense of closure. Just gray morning light and the quiet efficiency of a hospital waking up to another day of procedures, charts, and waiting rooms full of people pretending they weren't scared. Samuel was prepped before dawn. Danielle walked beside his bed as nurses rolled him toward pre-op. The wheels squeaked softly against the floor. She focused on that sound because if she stopped, her thoughts would spiral. You don't have to stay the whole time, Samuel said, trying for lightness. I know hospitals make you anxious. Danielle snorted. You're the one about to be cut open and you're worried about me? He smiled faintly. Occupational habit. Big brother instincts die hard. She reached out and squeezed his hand as they stopped outside the operating room. You still sure about this? She asked quietly. Samuel met her eyes. About the surgery or everything else? She hesitated. Both. I'm sure about one thing, he said. I don't want you carrying this alone anymore. A nurse stepped forward. We're ready. Samuel took a breath. Guess that's my cue. Danielle leaned down, pressing her forehead to his for a brief second. I'll be right here. As the doors swung shut, something inside her clenched and didn't let go. The waiting room felt colder than the rest of the hospital. Chairs arranged in neat rows. A TV mounted too high, playing a morning talk show no one was watching. Julian arrived 20 minutes later. He looked different. No suit jacket. No polished ease. Just a man sitting down across from her, hands clasped tightly together. They just went in, Danielle said. Julian nodded. I know. She studied his face. You didn't have to come. I know, he repeated. But I wasn't going to be anywhere else. They sat in silence, broken only by the occasional announcement over the intercom. An hour passed. Then another. Danielle checked her phone obsessively. No messages. No updates. Just the steady tick of time moving forward without asking permission. Finally, Eleanor appeared. She didn't sit. The filing went through, she said quietly. It's public now. Julian's jaw tightened. How fast will they respond? They already are, Eleanor replied. Your family's legal team issued a statement 10 minutes ago. Danielle's heart raced. What does it say? That they deny all wrongdoing, Eleanor said. And that the claims are being brought by parties with questionable motivations. Danielle laughed bitterly. Of course. There's more, Eleanor added. They named your mother. Danielle felt like the air left the room. How? They framed her as a disgruntled employee who failed medical screenings, Eleanor said. They're laying groundwork to discredit her testimony retroactively. Samuel's voice echoed in Danielle's head. They don't get to touch her. Julian stood abruptly. That's a lie. Yes, Eleanor agreed. But it's a strategic one. Danielle's hands shook. Can they do that? They can say almost anything, Eleanor replied. Proving it's false takes time. Julian ran a hand through his hair. What about retaliation? Eleanor looked at him. Your access to company accounts has already been frozen. Julian let out a slow breath. Then it started. Before Danielle could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Family of Samuel Carter? She asked. Danielle stood so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. That's me, she said. The nurse smiled gently. The surgery is over. Danielle's knees nearly buckled. Is he? He's alive, the nurse said quickly. And stable. The procedure went as planned. Relief crashed over Danielle so hard she had to grab the back of a chair to stay upright. Julian closed his eyes, exhaling sharply. You'll be able to see him shortly, the nurse continued. He's in recovery. As the nurse walked away, Danielle felt tears spill freely down her face for the first time in days. We made it, she whispered. Julian nodded, but his expression stayed tense. Through this part. They stood there together, exhausted, relieved, and bracing for what came next. Because somewhere beyond the hospital walls, statements were being drafted, narratives rewritten, and reputations sharpened into weapons. And as Danielle wiped her eyes and headed toward recovery, her phone buzzed again. A notification from a news outlet. Breaking. Major corporate lawsuit filed alleging decades of suppressed safety data. She stared at the headline, heart pounding. Samuel had survived the surgery. But the war had just officially begun. Samuel woke up slowly as if he were swimming up from the bottom of a lake. Everything felt thick and distant. Voices reached him first, muffled and indistinct. Then the steady beep of a monitor. Then pain, dull, deep, and unfamiliar. Hey, Danielle's voice said softly. You're okay. You're here. He cracked his eyes open. The ceiling was a blur. He blinked until her face came into focus, tired but smiling. Did I? He whispered. You made it, she said, squeezing his hand. You scared everyone, but you made it. Samuel exhaled. Figures. Julian stood a few feet behind her. Samuel noticed him, then looked back at Danielle. Did the world end while I was out? He asked weakly. She hesitated. Not yet. Julian stepped forward. But it's trying. Samuel gave a faint, crooked smile. Sounds about right. Over the next 2 days, recovery was slow. Samuel drifted in and out of sleep. Nurses came and went. Pain meds dulled the sharp edges but left him foggy. Danielle stayed close, even when Julian had to step away to deal with calls and lawyers. On the third morning, Samuel was lucid enough to read the news on Danielle's phone. He scrolled slowly, eyes narrowing. They're dragging Mom through the mud, he said. Danielle nodded. Eleanor says it's a distraction. A way to shift focus. Samuel swallowed. Does it work? Sometimes, she admitted. Julian returned later that afternoon, looking more tired than Danielle had ever seen him. They cut me off completely, he said quietly. Accounts. Office access. Everything. Samuel raised an eyebrow. Welcome to the other side. Julian gave a tired smile. It's not as glamorous as I was led to believe. Danielle watched him. Do you regret it? He didn't answer right away. I regret not doing it sooner. That night, a woman showed up at Samuel's room. She was in her late 30s, dark hair pulled back, eyes tired but determined. My name is Lila Carter, she said. I'm your cousin. Samuel blinked. We don't have a cousin named Lila. Yes, you do, she replied. You just didn't know about me. Danielle stiffened. What are you talking about? Lila took a breath. Your mother helped my father after he was injured at the same plant. When he died, she stayed in touch. Quietly. Samuel's heart pounded. Why are you here now? Because I saw the news, Lila said. And because I have something you need. She pulled a thick envelope from her bag. More documents, Julian murmured. More than that, Lila said. Names, patterns, medical records. They tried to erase my family too. Danielle felt a chill. Why didn't you come forward before? Lila's voice softened. Because they threatened my children. The room went silent. Samuel closed his eyes. So this is bigger than us. Yes, Lila said. Much bigger. Julian stepped closer. You're willing to testify? I already have, Lila replied. Just not publicly. Danielle looked at Samuel. He nodded once. Eleanor needs to see this, Danielle said. I'll get it to her, Julian said. Lila hesitated. There's one more thing. Everyone turned to her. The company's legal team isn't just fighting in court, she said. They're hiring investigators, digging into families, looking for anything they can twist. Julian's jaw tightened. I know. They were in my neighborhood last week, Lila continued. Asking about you, Samuel. Samuel laughed weakly. I'm flattered. Lila didn't smile. They're trying to build a narrative. One that makes you look unreliable. Danielle's anger flared. They won't win. Lila met her eyes. They don't have to win. They just have to confuse people. After she left, the room felt heavier. Julian leaned against the wall. We need to prepare for leaks. Samuel frowned. What kind of leaks? The kind that make you question everything you thought you knew, Julian said. Danielle's phone buzzed. She looked down. A headline from a gossip site. Sources claim Carter family lawsuit driven by personal vendetta and hidden financial motives. Her heart sank. They've started, she said quietly. Samuel stared at the screen, then looked up at Julian. You said you were ready to lose everything, he said. Julian met his gaze. I am. Samuel nodded. Good. Because they're about to try to take all of us with you. And as the beeping of the heart monitor filled the room, steady and stubborn, Danielle realized something. Samuel had survived the surgery. Now they had to survive the truth. By the end of the week, Samuel's hospital room no longer felt like a place of healing. It felt like a bunker. Nurses still came and went. Medications were still delivered on schedule. But now there were also whispered phone calls, news alerts, and the constant sense that every word could be taken out of context and used against them. Danielle barely let go of her phone. Every few minutes another headline appeared. Some repeated the company's denial. Others hinted that the Carter family was chasing money. One article even implied that Samuel's collapse had been caused by substance use. "That's a lie," Samuel said, staring at the screen. "I know," Danielle replied, anger tightening her voice. "But lies travel faster than facts." Julian stood near the window, listening to a voicemail on speaker. The voice on the other end was sharp and controlled. "Julian, this is your father's counsel. You are damaging yourself and this family. If you continue, you will find that doors you assumed were always open are not." Julian ended the call without responding. "They think fear will bring me back," he said. Samuel snorted weakly. "They don't know you very well." Julian gave a small smile. "Neither did I until recently." Later that afternoon, Eleanor arrived with a stack of printed pages. "Depositions are being scheduled," she said. "Yours, Samuel. And yours, Danielle." Danielle's heart skipped. "Already?" "They're trying to get you on record before more evidence surfaces," Eleanor replied. "It's a common tactic." Samuel shifted uncomfortably. "I just had surgery." "That won't stop them," Eleanor said. "But I will. We'll delay until your doctor clears you." Julian glanced at the papers. "What about the other families?" "Lila's testimony changed things," Eleanor replied. "2 more families have contacted me." Danielle's eyes widened. "2? Already?" Eleanor said. "Once people see someone else speak up, it becomes harder to stay silent." Samuel smiled faintly. Mom would have liked that. But the optimism didn't last long. That evening, as Danielle walked to the vending machine, her phone buzzed again. A message from a number she didn't recognize. "We know where your brother is." Her blood ran cold. Another message followed. "Be careful how brave you get." Danielle turned slowly, scanning the hallway. Nurses. Visitors. A man leaning against the far wall, pretending to look at his phone. Her heart pounded. She went back to Samuel's room and locked the door. "Someone's watching us," she whispered. Julian's expression hardened. "Show me." She handed him the phone. "That's not just intimidation," Julian said. "That's a threat." Eleanor arrived less than an hour later with hospital security. "They crossed a line," she said. "We're documenting everything." Samuel lay back against his pillows, pale but alert. "So what now?" "Now we make it harder for them to operate in the dark," Eleanor replied. "Public filings. Media strategy. Controlled exposure." Danielle frowned. "You want us to go public?" "I want you to survive this," Eleanor said. "Silence won't protect you anymore." Julian nodded. "She's right." Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Do it." The first interview aired the next morning. Danielle sat beside Samuel in the hospital room, lights pointed toward them. A reporter off camera asked careful, polite questions. "Why come forward now?" the reporter asked. Samuel's voice was steady. "Because I almost died. And because people deserve to know why." Danielle held his hand tightly. Within hours, the clip was everywhere. Support flooded in. Messages from strangers. From former workers. From families who had never gotten answers. But so did backlash. One viral post accused them of staging the whole thing. Julian watched the numbers climb. "This is what they want," he said. Noise. Confusion. That night, as Samuel slept, Danielle sat by the window, staring at the city lights. "You still think this was the right call?" Julian asked quietly. She nodded. "I think hiding was killing us faster." Julian leaned against the wall. "My father tried to reach me again." "What did he say?" "He asked if this was worth burning every bridge I had." Danielle looked at him. What did you tell him? Julian met her eyes. I told him some bridges need to burn. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Danielle's phone buzzed one more time. A new message. We're not done. She didn't show Julian this one. She just looked at her brother sleeping, fragile but alive, and felt a deep, quiet certainty. Whatever was coming next, it wasn't going to be gentle. And it wasn't going to be one-sided anymore. The next morning, the hospital moved Samuel to a private room. Officially, it was for recovery. Unofficially, everyone knew it was for safety. A security guard sat outside the door now. He nodded politely when Danielle passed, but his presence made her skin prickle. It was one thing to be watched by a hospital. It was another to be watched because someone out there might want to scare them into silence. Samuel noticed it too. So I'm important now, he said weakly, glancing at the guard. Guess I should have collapsed sooner. Danielle gave a tired smile. Don't joke about that. Julian arrived later with coffee and a stack of printed emails. They're scrambling, he said. Internally. Samuel raised an eyebrow. How do you know? Because people who used to pretend I didn't exist are suddenly begging me to talk, Julian replied. Danielle flipped through the emails. Executives, lawyers, even distant relatives. What do they want? She asked. Control, Julian said. They want me back inside the tent. Samuel smirked. So you can tell them what we're doing. Julian nodded. Exactly. Silence stretched. You could use that, Danielle said slowly. Julian looked at her. You're thinking infiltration. I'm thinking information, she replied. Eleanor arrived not long after, her expression thoughtful. I was going to suggest the same thing, she said when Julian explained. If they think they're pulling him back, they'll talk more freely. Julian frowned. You're asking me to pretend to betray you. I'm asking you to listen, Eleanor corrected. Carefully. Samuel watched Julian. You don't have to. Julian shook his head. I've been living a lie my whole life. I can manage one more if it means this ends clean. Danielle's chest tightened. Just don't let them pull you back for real. Julian met her gaze. They can't. Not anymore. That afternoon, Julian took a call from his father in the hallway. Danielle couldn't hear the words, but she could see Julian's jaw tighten, his posture stiffen. When he came back, his face was pale. They want a meeting, he said. Tomorrow. Off the record. Samuel nodded. Then you go. Julian hesitated. If they realize I'm feeding information. They won't, Eleanor said. Not if you play the role they expect. That night, Danielle dreamed of her mother. Not the tired woman she remembered, but the version from old photos. Standing straight. Eyes bright. Unafraid. When Danielle woke, her phone was buzzing. A message from Lila. They're asking questions about you again. Danielle typed back quickly. Where? Near your apartment. Her heart raced. Julian was already on his way to the meeting. Samuel was still asleep. And Danielle suddenly realized how exposed they all were. She slipped out into the hallway, dialing Eleanor's number. We need more protection, she said. They're circling. I know, Eleanor replied. And we're about to give them something else to focus on. What? Danielle asked. The first batch of documents is being unsealed, Eleanor said. Today. Danielle leaned against the wall. So the truth goes public. Yes, Eleanor said. And when it does, they'll have less time to harass you and more time to explain themselves. Danielle exhaled. I hope you're right. In the private room, Samuel stirred. He opened his eyes and looked around. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then memory came rushing back. The surgery. The lawsuit. The cameras. He glanced at the door, half expecting someone else to walk in with another piece of bad news. Instead, Danielle returned, trying to look calm. Hey, he said. What did I miss? She forced a smile. Nothing yet. But outside the room, phones were lighting up across the city. Journalists were opening sealed files. And Julian was walking into a room full of people who still believed he belonged to them. None of them knew it yet. But by the end of the day, something was going to break. And there would be no pretending after that. The courthouse steps were already crowded when Danielle arrived. Cameras, microphones, reporters shouting names that hadn't been spoken out loud for decades. She stood at the edge of it all, clutching her phone, feeling like a ghost watching her own life finally become real. Inside, Samuel was waiting with Eleanor. His face was pale, but his eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been since the surgery. Julian hadn't called yet. That worried her more than anything else. When the first batch of documents hit the public record, it was like a dam broke. Within minutes, headlines started rolling in. Billionaire family linked to long-hidden medical scandal. Hospital records suggest decades-old cover-up. Waitress at center of explosive lawsuit. Danielle closed her eyes as her name appeared on one of the screens. Not in full. Just enough to make her recognizable. Samuel squeezed her hand. You don't have to look. I do, she whispered. I've been invisible my whole life. If they're going to see me now, I need to know what they're saying. Across the lobby, people stared. Some with curiosity. Some with suspicion. A few with something that looked like shame. Eleanor leaned toward them. We've already gotten 3 requests for settlement talks. Samuel let out a breath. That fast? They're afraid, she said. Fear makes people generous. Danielle thought of her mother. Of all the years she spent quietly cleaning, serving, surviving, never knowing her name was buried in files that could have protected her. A vibration buzzed in Danielle's pocket. Julian. Her hands shook as she answered. Are you okay? She asked. I'm out, he said. They tried to keep me there longer, but I left. Did they say anything? Samuel asked, leaning close. Julian paused. They admitted more than they meant to. I recorded it. Danielle's heart skipped. You did? Yeah, he said. They were so sure I was on their side. They talked about moving money. About pressuring doctors. About making you disappear from the records. Samuel closed his eyes slowly. So we have proof. We have enough to bury them, Julian said quietly. A heavy silence filled the line. Then Julian added, but there's something else. Danielle's stomach tightened. What? My father, Julian said. He didn't just know. He was the one who signed the original orders. He chose profit over people. Over your mother. Danielle felt like the air had been knocked out of her. Samuel stared at her, helpless. I'm sorry, Julian said. I didn't know until today. If I had. You don't have to explain, Danielle said. Her voice was steady, but it didn't feel like it belonged to her. You didn't do it. I know, Julian replied. But I still need to make it right. The call ended. Danielle sank into a chair. Everything made sense now. The sudden promotions her mother never got. The way certain supervisors avoided her. The quiet threats that had pushed her out of the hospital. It had never been random. It had been planned. Eleanor's phone buzzed again. She glanced at the screen, then looked up with a sharp smile. They're panicking. They want to talk. All of them. Samuel laughed softly. For once, I'd like to be the one who doesn't answer. The courtroom doors opened. A bailiff called their case. As they stood, Danielle's legs trembled. Not from fear. From the weight of everything she was carrying for the people who never got to stand here. Inside, the judge took her seat. Lawyers shuffled papers. Across the aisle, the Whitlock family legal team sat stiffly, their confident expressions cracking for the first time. Danielle caught a glimpse of Julian's father in the back. He wouldn't look at her. Good. Eleanor began to speak. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The plaintiffs will demonstrate a deliberate pattern of medical suppression, financial manipulation, and personal retaliation spanning over 3 decades. Danielle felt Samuel's hand steady hers. With every word, the truth stepped further into the light. Hours later, when they finally stepped back outside, the world had shifted. The crowd was louder. The cameras closer. But something else was there too. A sense that a long-hidden story had finally been heard. Julian met them on the steps. He looked exhausted, but free. "I sent the recordings to Eleanor," he said. "They're already verifying them." Samuel nodded. "Thank you." Julian turned to Danielle. "I know sorry isn't enough." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "Just don't be silent anymore." He swallowed. "I won't." They stood there together as the sun dipped behind the buildings. For the first time, Danielle felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not relief, not victory, but space. Space where grief could breathe, where truth could exist without being hidden, where her mother's life finally meant something to the world. Samuel squeezed her hand. "We're not done," he said. "No," Danielle agreed softly. "But we're not alone anymore." As the crowd roared around them, their story was no longer locked in files or whispered in hallways. It was out, and it wasn't going back. Before you go, if this story pulled you in, touched something, or made you feel even a little less alone, don't forget to like and subscribe. And if you have a moment, leave a comment. Your voice matters more than you know.